Hey everyone, it's Mark Howard from the Absolute Business Mindset podcast and YouTube channel. Thank you very much for joining me today. Today we have Rob Greenlee, who's a really dear friend of mine, who is a podcast guru. He's been in the business for so many years and been doing such a varied things. These podcasts that he's got, he's been in industry working for Libsyn and Podbean for some time. He's now back on the creator side as well with Podcast EZ, and I'm so excited to share with you this podcast today. He's such a great guy, such a person with so much knowledge within the podcast arena, tech, sales. He's just done everything. He's a great friend of mine, so thank you very much for going on and listening to this podcast and this YouTube. What I want you to do is, if you are enjoying this content even just a little bit, please give it a thumbs up. Equally, can you please hit the subscribe button? It really does make a big impact on the channel. So please do hit the subscribe button. Please do give it a like. Any comments you've got today about this interview or anything else, people you'd like me to have on the show, please do leave them in the comments below. So thank you very much, and over to the podcast. Today we have Rob Greenlee, who is a partner and co-founder of Podcast EZ and a podcast himself. Now, I know Rob before. I've been on a mastermind with him for some time, so I actually know, like, full disclaimer, I know Rob from before this interview. I don't think it's understating at all to say that Rob is a podcast guru and is an amazing guest. I'm so excited to have him with me today. So thank you, Rob. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Well, Mark, thanks for having me on your show. It's great to talk with you as always, and I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of interesting topics today.
Yeah, we'll
so
delve into it. We'll delve into it. So the podcast is called Absolute Business Mindset. The first question I ask all of my guests is, what does a business mindset mean to you?
Well, I think it's evolved for me. It's evolved over the years as I've worked in business. I have a BA degree from college, so I came in to the work world from that perspective of a business, right, and that way of thinking. So, but I think as I've worked in business, what I found is that it's really a people business is what it is. I mean, it's sure there's legal aspects, there's accounting, there's kind of more mechanical functioning things that are required by the government, but at the end of the day, it's really about working with people, and it's about building relationships, building trust, building a value exchange type of situation. So I approached it in college from the perspective of marketing. So that was my focus. But what's happened over the years is, that education that I got in what marketing has changed a lot with technology. So that's what kind of took me down this pathway of getting more involved in creating content online, was the opportunity of this concept. And I thought of it very early as the concept of content marketing, which is basically using content as a way to reach people directly. And that I saw very early on. That's why I started a radio show, and I started building distribution of my show. And so that's how I started. It became a much more personal thing for me. And that's what took me down the trajectory that I'm on, of working and building trust and building relationships with people. And I did that as a sales rep for a lot of large companies. I owned a restaurant for 5 years. I worked for the Florida Citrus Commission for 5 years as well. And that was all about building relationships with buyers and brands and all this kind of stuff. So that's really kind of my orientation. That's why you see in my background, there's so many job roles that I've had that have the title partnerships.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. I think business and sort of life is all about building relationships and building long-standing relationships. And yeah, I think a lot of people misunderstand things like marketing, that you are marketing to a person. And so that is the critical piece to business. So I think it's interesting that you flag that right at the start. We're going to talk about, a little bit, touch on your marketing and the early internet and stuff, and some of the sales roles and some of the roles that you've done with relationships and building relationships with people. But one of another question that I'm asking a lot of people at the start is, thinking about your upbringing, is there one thing about that that reflects upon who you are as a person today?
Well, my upbringing was, I'm an only child for one thing, so I don't have any siblings. Though I wound up having two children myself, so I got exposed to sibling dynamics
Yeah.
with my own kids. So, but yeah, I think growing up an only child definitely painted me in a certain kind of mold, and that kind of developed over time into being a little bit more kind of, I guess, more thinking about myself as a younger person, not really communicating with others very much when I was younger. I got involved in athletics and was physically expressive in my life, but my younger Rob was not exactly someone that you would think would be on a microphone right now. So it was my expression back then when I was younger was really more physical than it was talking or anything like that. And I had a little bit of a speech impediment after about the age of 7, where I basically lost confidence in my ability to really talk and to communicate. So it was just one of those, I don't know what happened, but it just, I lost kind of, confidence in my ability to speak. So I really focused on expressing myself physically in sports, played basketball, played competitive basketball for 13 years and was very successful at playing basketball and sports, and was a high jumper, cross country runner, all those kinds of things too. So I was very active physically. But then as I got into college, I went to college and I played competitive college basketball as well. And I found myself moving more towards academics, and then really started pulling back on the athletics stuff as I kind of my last 2 years of college. So I played on varsity basketball in college and things like that. But the last year, I basically pulled out of it so I could focus on academics. So, because I found it too difficult to play competitive sports and be successful in the classroom and get my degree and all that kind of stuff. So it was, some people can pull it off, but it's not always an easy path, even for those folks. And oftentimes what happens is that those athletes compromise their academics because they're more passionate about their athletics, and that puts them in a difficult position when they get done with athletics. So that was the decision that I had to make back in those days. So it really shaped me on that side. And then the younger Rob, when I was getting involved in sports, I had very strong kind of leaders in my life when I was growing up, and they were my coaches. I mean, my father was important to me as well, and he was always there, and my mother and all that stuff too. But I would say that the strong kind of guidance that I got from the junior high, high school, and college coaches that I had, really kind of working with me, helping me build my confidence, build my skills, build my ability, build my discipline. All that stuff really had an impact on the trajectory of my career, and really building that confidence that then could be, I guess over time evolved into success as an adult, more and more. Just having that background and realizing that when somebody criticizes you and really kind of puts you in your place, that maybe that person is actually doing that because they care about you, but they also are doing it because they want to succeed and they want to be successful as well. And they want you to be a part of that, right? So that's kind of how I got kind of pulled into this teamwork activity that had a huge impact on the development of my future path in business. So of being
Were
able to work with others.
were
Right.
you competitive?
Yeah, I mean, in order to achieve the amount of success that I had as a basketball player with the teams that I was on, I had to be very competitive, and that was a trait that I had developed because of the coaches that I had, that basically instilled that competitive spirit. Plus, but I think it's, to be frank about it, I think it's tempered a little bit. That competitiveness kind of evolved into being a little bit less win-lose, and it became a little bit more of trying to create win-wins.
I
And
just
that's,
wrote that down, Rob. Because
yeah.
I think that's a transition from sort of childhood, adolescence into adulthood. Is that realization that not everything is a win or a loss or a draw.
Yeah.
Actually, in business and in life and relationships, you can often create win-win solutions which work for both
Mm-hmm.
parties, which I think is incredibly important. But I just want to talk about this, the idea of the lack of confidence. So I find it quite strange. I've seen you talk on panels, in conferences, as well as listening to a couple of your episodes on your podcast as well. And you always strike me as being someone that's self-assured. You know who you are. You know what you can do, what you do well. Um, this exploration for confidence through your adolescence, not that you ever crack it, but what apart, well, like you were talking about coaches that impacted you, were they the people that gave you that confidence to work out who you are and what that means to you?
I think it was a combination of just, I think just growing up and becoming more mature, I think is a big part of it too. I think when you're an adolescent and you're younger, I think you're a little bit lacking in confidence in who you are, especially if you have a speech communication challenge
Mm,
early on. You're just not sure how to handle that, right? And you feel embarrassed, and you feel like it's the safest thing to do is to pull back, not
mm,
jump forward. And so I think over time, I learned to cope with that limitation and minimize it as much as I can,
mm,
and to move beyond it and build that confidence over time. And as I got older, it became easier to do that. And I don't know that everyone that goes through that in adolescence ever really fully develops, and I mean, because I was told in school that I probably wasn't college material, that kind of stuff. I mean, in like high,
mm.
not high school, but junior high school and younger and stuff like that, because of, I don't know, things that I guess people saw in one's ability to step out and take a communication type of an approach. So it just it's something that developed over time. And as I saw success as a competitive basketball player, I was put into more situations where I had to, like, maybe talk to the media, or I had to go on a radio show or something like that. It was a little bit of a progressive thing, that I got a little bit better. And then, early in my career, I got pulled into maybe giving a presentation in front of the classroom, and then maybe got up in front of like a city council and talked about an issue that was important to me. And just those little things where you're getting up in front of people and start building confidence. And then at one point, I was a panelist at the Streaming Media West event. This was after I'd started my radio show, which was very bumpy. And I mean, if you go to robgreenlee.com and go to my archive area of my website, if you scroll to the very bottom of the page, you can hear one of the very first episodes that I ever did on the radio.
Mm.
And this was back in 1999. And you could tell, I mean, it was a rough time. so when I started doing radio, which is where I started in all this path on content creation, it was really kind of like I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I didn't have a background. Sure, I had a marketing degree and I had done radio campaigns on the advertising side. So I've spent a lot of years on the advertising side in marketing as well, television, radio, all that kind of stuff. So I had kind of an exposure to it, but not getting on the microphone or in front of the camera. But over a successive period of years, I started getting pulled more and more into doing those kinds of things for other projects that I was working on too. So I became developing some level of confidence that, well, let's do it. And then I saw the internet happen in 1996, and I saw content marketing, and then I was working for the Florida Citrus Commission back then. And I built the first Florida Citrus website, and then later built the world's largest glass of orange juice for the Florida Citrus Commission.
Yes.
And so I was heavily involved in building websites and getting out there, and increasingly people started noticing what I was doing and wanting to talk to me about it. So, and that's what got me kind of out there a little bit more. So
we could go in lots of different directions, but
oh yeah.
what I want, it's great, it's fantastic. So before we go on to the internet and the role that you were involved in early internet and the growth of the web, let's touch on the radio. So what made you want your first show? What made you feel that you needed to be in front of the microphone, that you wanted to add value that way? What started, because it was Web Talk World Radio show that you first
Right.
did. You did 1996 to 2006, 1999 to 2006.
Yep.
So what made you initially go, I need to be in front of this microphone?
Well, I had started a search engine marketing consulting practice, kind of like a side hustle when I was working for the Florida Citrus Commission back then. So I was helping local companies in my community to get their companies listed in Yahoo and Alta Vista and some of the early search engines. So I was doing some side contracts and things that trying to help those local businesses take advantage of the internet. And so I thought in the local radio station in the local city that I was at, this is up in the Seattle area, that, you know, the internet was this up and coming thing that a lot of people didn't understand. And so I thought maybe if I went into a radio station and I started talking about the internet and the web on a radio show, that I could pick up some new clients.
Right.
So it was really not about the radio, really about doing a radio show. It was more about picking up, using this as a marketing vehicle to build trust and to pick up clients for my side hustle. So it just so happened that I brought in like 3 other friends of mine that had equal passions about what was happening with the internet. And so we kind of created almost like a morning show format
Right.
of talk radio, talking about what was happening culturally and technologically with the growth and development of the internet and the web. And it was a very interesting time with the internet. There was a lot of mystery and a lot of cultural changes happening with the development of that technology back then. And at the time, I had no idea what the impact of that stuff was. I mean, we talked about wireless internet access, and early on, we talked about mobile phones having wireless internet access way before there was any phones that did that.
So what was your I'm interested because, so 1999, I was at university, and I got my first mobile phone when I was 18, when I went to university. I had a computer, but a big boxy computer,
IBM.
the old desktop style.
Yeah, right.
But I had no vision that the internet was going to spread the way that it has, and how it's impacting. I often say when I was in the early noughties, it was like there was information technology. There were computer people that worked in the in companies, and they were the guys who fixed problems, software or hardware. But now those things, yes, we still have those but the information technology is now spread in all businesses, in all aspects, whether it's in marketing, social media, whether it's in AI, etc., blockchain. What at 1999 did you see? What did you see the potential for the internet and how it was going to? What was the thing that you saw that you thought, this is going to be big, I need to be involved in this?
Well, it was the direct kind of interactive connection with individuals. So if I was a content creator, I create a website, right? Individuals could go directly to that and interact with that. Now, marketing up to that point was a very separated kind of a thing. You basically had to utilize radio or television, whatever, and it was a one-way communication pathway.
Yeah.
And so what I saw with the internet was this kind of potential of an interactive relationship directly with products and customers, right? So you could bypass this middle person of a radio station or a TV station to be able to reach those customers, right? So it's the whole internet was really about decentralizing control of access between this side and that side, right? It was more like putting people in charge of what they control. It was more of a lean in thing, where the world at that time was very much a lean back experience when it came to media and information, right? It was kind of like turn it on, sit back, and you get what's delivered to you. You don't really have you have a little bit of choice. You can go to channel 6, channel 8, channel 10, and same thing with the radio, right? But those programmers at those stations control what you have access to. But with the internet and the web, you had search engines. Google eventually developed and really transformed all of our lives, and it was just a fundamental shift. And at the time, I thought it was all fantastic. It was like democratization of information. People can, better communicate with each other. I had a very utopian view of what the internet could do. Right. And that's how I portrayed it in my radio show too. It was very much like, wow, I'm so excited about this development and stuff like that. And back then it was seen that way. But as time has progressed, what I've learned is that technology can do good and it can do bad at the same time. And back in the early days, it wasn't really thought of or done in ways that were evil or have a bad intent, right? But I think as we've seen over the years of progress, we've seen technology increasingly used as a good and a weapon. And I think that's what has me a little bit kind of like, what was I doing back then? Was I promoting this in a way that potentially took us down this path of what we're facing now, which is technology can now be used to weaponize against people. And I don't want to take responsibility for helping contribute to the growth of this, but I do worry about that.
Yeah, and I think I agree. Like, social media is positive in lots of ways, but there is, in my view, the dopamine hit of Instagram, that you've got to have your picture that looks, the world is perfect. I do kind of think that although this is true, there's always been that mentality in human beings. I think it's maybe been exaggerated slightly with the way of social media, Instagram and TikTok and all those social media platforms, which are sort of making it easier for people to be able to show this fake life. But you think about it, I don't know. I just think it was interesting. I saw a picture, and it was the 1950s versus the 2010s, and it was people standing on a train station. And in the 1950s, everyone had their paper, and they were ignored absolutely everyone and was just fixated on reading their paper. Now in 2010s, 2020s, everyone's on their phone. So I do, and I think that sort of portrayal of that perfect life, it might have been 30, 40 years ago, it might have been going out and portraying that your job is fantastic and your life is brilliant, and I've got the great girlfriend or the wife, whatever it is. So I actually think technology is only really replicating what human beings did anyway. I just think they're making it easier, and I'd be interested to hear your view on this. I just think technology is making it easier to try and portray that life of that perfect life that everyone has.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. That all technology does is reflect our interests and our way of thinking. And I think what we're starting to see is that becoming in full display, right? Yeah. So, if you look at AI technology now, if you fast forward to what we're facing right now, AI is like, it's mirrored after humans, right? But the difference is that it's mirrored across all humans, right? So that's what's different about it. It's I think up till we've reached this point of thinking about AI technology is that sure, computers have been, we're collecting information from humans, right? So we're all individual computers of sorts, right? So each one of us has independent thought, independent kind of, we're isolated, right? In our own little world, right? Around us. Sure, we interact with others, but there hasn't been, a way to connect all of us together, right? From a information perspective. And I think that's kind of where we're at now, is that the technology has progressed to a point where we can start connecting thoughts and information and things like that collectively amongst all of us, and input into another memory base, or some sort of an intelligent pool of human thought and communication. So if you look at the GPT-4 platform, it's really built on information that was contributed from humans
Yes.
into a collective database, and it's doing is processing all that information. And I think a lot of us are scared of what that potential could be, of us all losing our independence of thought and our uniqueness. Because once it gets thrown into a pot, then is there uniqueness at that point?
There is, but I do kind of think we started with that people should be the main focus, whether it's business or whether it's life or
Right.
family. I don't think that will necessarily change. I think there's certain constants that will happen when you're dealing with technology, and there's obvious that there are some negatives, but I do think the element of the human, as long as there is still an element of a human impact in that, then we should be fine. But I don't want to doomsday anyone. But I want to go on. No, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to add one little piece to this too. I think that we have to step back and realize that we are the ones that are creating this, right? Humans are the ones that are creating this artificial intelligence. So we should have the ability to make it what we want it to be, not make something that then, like what some people are saying, is going to kill us, right? If you want to take it to the extreme here, because it's so much more intelligent than we are. But we have to keep in mind, we created this thing. So I think we have to figure out a way. It's not so much control it, but let's just make it something that is beneficial to humans, not destructive to humans. And I think that's the challenge that we have, is that our human tendency is to have an aspect of everything that we do that's kind of weaponized, right? And that's my fear right now around AI, is that there's going to be some people that are going to want to weaponize it.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. Look, let's go into podcasting. I was going to talk to you about your time in marketing and Microsoft, and spending many years at Microsoft, which is fascinating. We might come back to that, but where did the love for podcasting start for you?
I think it really started when I started doing my radio show, because that started in 1999. Podcasting didn't actually officially start till 2004, but I was right there with the early group of podcasters that started making my show available in an RSS feed. It just so happened I was building a new website that was being developed, ironically, by a company out of the Ukraine at the time. And so I had done an exchange with them with my radio show, that I would promote them because they were a website development company out of the Ukraine. And so it just so happened that they were rolling out my new website that I had built with RSS, and I had a custom built blog and all that stuff like that, at the same time that podcasting kind of hit its stride back in the summer of 2004. I had already been distributing my radio show as an MP3 download off of all sorts of other types of platforms that were very similar to podcasting for quite a few years beforehand. And one of them was with Microsoft. So I made 25 cents per transfer of an episode between Windows XP and a Pocket PC device through a platform called Sync and Go with Microsoft. So I was making like $5,000 a month just transferring my radio show from a Windows XP device to a Pocket PC device. So that's kind of how I got involved in all this stuff, and was very heavily involved in precursor platforms. There was other platforms that were taking my streams that I was doing off of Windows Media and Real Streams, they were recording the streams and then they were making it available as a download later.
Right.
Those type of platforms were going on before podcasting too. So yeah, so kind of getting started with podcasting for me was really kind of a nothing burger, to be quite frank about it. It was a very small part of my distribution at the time, because most of my distribution was on satellite radio and on broadcast radio. At the time, I was on like 15 broadcast stations and on the XM satellite radio network at that time, and that's where I was getting most of my audience.
That's fascinating. And then you moved into more content roles, and so like, I'm fast forwarding quite a bit, but we're going to jump back in a minute. So you then started taking on more sort of, if I say corporate roles, so you worked for Libsyn, you worked for Spreaker, you've worked for Podbean. When did you, and I know you did the new media show and you still do the new media show, but when was that transfer from content driven roles into more, corporate's not quite the right word, but more into the business side of podcasting?
Well, that actually takes us back to when I started my show, actually, because back when I was doing what I was doing, there were no Libsyns, there were no platforms out there that I could go to say, do this with my show. I had to build it myself.
Right.
So I had to build servers, literal server boxes, load operating systems, and install them in CDNs. This was back. I started doing that back in like 2001 or so, as the show was scaling. So I started building that out. At one point I had 6 servers and 2 co-location facilities to support my show. And then I increasingly had capacity to take on other shows. So I was really, in the early days, this was like 2001 or so, started hosting other radio shows on my infrastructure that I had built. So I was kind of my own service provider, and I had to admin that for many years before I got out of it. But that's how I kind of got started with it. And then I took on a full-time role at a company called Melodio in Seattle. It's a startup company in Seattle. It was actually a music company that was making music available on mobile phones. This was back in 2005. And I took on a marketing role in downtown Seattle with this company that was later purchased by HP. But it was basically a platform that had decided to move from music to podcasting. So they had built this Java app infrastructure for mobile phones back then. Right. And they wanted to make audio podcasts available on these mobile phones. This was pre-iPhone, pre-smartphone era. Yeah. Right. So that's when I started, really kind of working on the platform side, and did a lot of deals with wireless carriers around the world to build catalogs, podcasting catalogs for individual carriers around the world. Some in Europe, like O2, and in the UK, I built catalogs for them, and then they sold a subscription service into their mobile phones platform that gave access to data as well as a whole content catalog that I had built for them, specifically for O2.
Something that struck me having this conversation with you, Rob, is how technical your knowledge is, which I've never really grasped from speaking to you and spending time with you, that you're actually very techie. You actually have been brought up and sort of developed those skills. When you think you were in essence your own hosting platform for a while at the early days. Have you always had a fascination with technology?
Well, since technology has existed, because I certainly, back when I graduated from college, which was in 1986, technology was just barely lifting off back then. I my exposure to technology back then was doing statistics for my marketing concentration classes, and that was it. That was like using this mainframe type of computer to do statistical analysis on survey data. That was really my exposure. And then my father was an accountant, and he started to use these IBM PCs to do his accounting work. So I got exposed to computers, and I grew up in the Bellevue, Seattle area, which is where Microsoft started. So Bill Gates's first office was right across the street from where I was at in downtown Bellevue, back in the early days when he first got started. So I've always had this kind of interest in what was going on with Microsoft and PCs and things like that. So, but training wise, I don't have a degree in computer programming or computer education at all. I'm entirely self-taught.
Right.
And it just dove into it and struggled through it and did what I could to develop enough skills to get me in trouble sometimes. I mean, I think I've held a job for Podcast One down in Los Angeles as their CTO before. So I've had those type of roles before.
Mm.
I didn't, it wasn't, it wasn't easy for me to be the CTO of a podcast platform like a Podcast One.
Yeah.
That wasn't an easy role for me, but because I'm really a content marketing guy at the end of the day. But I think that there was a recognition that I had some technical skills that could be applied to, you know, the whole spectrum of what was needed, right, in a particular situation, and that I was willing to throw myself into it and do that kind of work for a period of time. And that's what's also made me a little bit of a Swiss Army knife in the podcasting space too. I've been able to talk about technical issues at the same time, talk about content and distribution issues and stuff. And that's been a strength. And I think here over the last, couple of years though, there's been really this move towards specialization increasingly. So those that have a lot of skills don't, it's not as favorable of a thing because fewer people have it.
Mm. What's the role? You said that you've got 2 kids. What's the role of your family in your life and what you do now?
Well, both of my children are fully grown up and they have their own families now with their own children. So, my son lives in Russia and my daughter lives in Phoenix, and they're building their own careers and their own families. So I don't have a lot involvement in that anymore. I've been lucky enough to be able to be relatively young and be able to live kind of like a post
Post-child time.
post-child life, right, to some degree. I mean, I spent a lot of years raising my kids and that kind of stuff. So it's, this is kind of like the last few years have been, freeing of being able to not have all those responsibilities again, so I can venture off and do things. So,
Well, absolutely, and you've done so much as well through your career. Let's bring you to fast forward to present day.
mhm.
So you set up a company. You're co-founder of Podcast EZ. What is that, and what are you doing now?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of doing two things with what I'm doing now. I'm a co-founder and kind of advisor to a podcast education and production company called podcastez.com. And I've been involved in that for probably a good year and a half, almost 2 years now. So it's just a matter of that company's been trying to find its way in the market. It's a difficult business to be in, to be a training and consulting and development company for podcasting. So there's a lot of competitors out there right now. But
So
that's really kind of
you're
a
helping podcasters. What do the marketing, do the content, how to
all those things,
production?
right? Yeah, all those things, right? The company started on the side of actually taking a new podcaster, taking them through the whole process and getting their show launched, doing the post-production, publishing, distribution, all that stuff for them, right? So it was really kind of a full service operation. And now the company is kind of shifting over to being more of an education platform, with maybe some light support on the content production side. And but
And what's the
that's
second role? What's the other thing you're doing?
the other thing is a company called Spoken Life Media, which is really a consulting business slash content creation company myself, where I'm going to roll up probably around 3 to 4, probably 3 new shows that I'm going to be producing and actually hosting, that are going to be under that umbrella, and then also doing a few contracts with some outside companies that need help in ancillary sides of the content creation business, not so much podcast hosting business, which I'm kind of at this point I'm kind of moving on from that side of my background, which I've been doing for like the last, I guess, eight and a half years or so, was on the podcast hosting platform side. So now it's kind of phasing a little bit back, a little bit more closer to how I started in all this,
Right.
on the content side, and helping others, continuing to help podcasters and networks and things like that to develop. But I am increasingly getting pulled into more topics and more potential projects around artificial intelligence as it relates
Okay.
to content creation and podcasting. So that seems to be a area where a lot of people have interest right now, from investors, and actually a lot of the companies in the medium right now are thinking, well, I need to probably embrace this AI thing to some degree to help podcasters kind of streamline their workflows, and maybe help content get published much more rapidly than how it's typically done. So those conversations are happening increasingly as well. And my background, being as broad as it is a good place to be to help those companies kind of think through those issues.
So something I'm playing around with at the moment for my own podcast is it Descript? Do you know
Hmm.
Descript?
I
So
do.
so what it is it's to streamline the way you edit your podcast, and it's less to do with sound, it's to do with the written, the transcripts that they've created. And I've been playing around with that with the audio. Is there anything that for you is going to, like, I can see you being a soothsayer here for me. Is there anything for other podcast creators that are listening to this that we should be looking at, to whether it's AI or any other technology that will really help the creator side?
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to get a perspective on this, just from talking to other companies and trying to understand the technology. I mean, I use it myself and trying to figure out what its strengths are, what its weaknesses are, and so that puts me in a better position to be able to, make recommendations to companies on how to proceed with this.
Mm.
Uh, I'm my general contribution on this topic is to proceed with caution. At this point, the technology is good, and it's remarkable in a lot of ways, what it's capable of doing. But I think you have to look very closely at what the results are,
Yeah.
and make sure that the results are consistent with your uniqueness, right? Instead of relying, see, I think the danger is relying on it too much too early. It is based on old data. It's based on two-year old data.
Okay.
So you have to keep that in mind, is that it's not going to be up to date.
Mm.
Um,
Well, it's the
now,
same with Chat GBT.
well, it is
It's like two
that's actually
years.
what I'm talking about.
Everything is 2 years old, and so if
Right.
you're going to ask information about a current, I don't know, if you're talking about the war in Ukraine, or
Mhm.
a government's decision 6 months ago,
Yeah.
it's not good. It doesn't hold that information. I think that's actually something that people aren't actually aware of, and should be aware that as you say, it's old data that they're holding. It is amazing. It's been super impactful for me with other projects that I've been doing.
Hmm.
But you do have to. It is a tread carefully with caution. There almost should be a disclaimer with when you're using it, just to
Yeah.
sort of let people know about those things. So, but is there anything else in the AI world? Let's put Chat GBT. It's been talked about a lot, and it's I find it incredible and very useful. Is there anything else that we should be thinking about? Mid-Journey was something else that someone shared with me. The pictures that you can create on
Hmm.
Mid-Journey, which is amazing as well. Is there anything else that we should be thinking about or looking into?
Yeah, I think that the power of it probably in the shorter term is more how it can, start to streamline repetitive tasks that maybe are considered to many in the podcasting space to be kind of grunt work, not real productive work, right? So if it's cutting and pasting things into forms or something like that, the computer, and this isn't necessarily artificial intelligence that is driving this, but it feels like that the AI is the engine that will enable this to more easily happen, which is basically creating titles of episodes, creating your show notes. Now, granted, there's companies out there that are already doing this, but the problem is they're independent tools. So, and this is a common thing that I've seen in technology just in general, is that there's usually startup companies that start up that are really building companies around what I call features of another company, right? But haven't been built in yet.
Yeah.
So the thinking is that I'm going to create this startup company and I'm going to get acquired, and it's going to be built into this other bigger company's platform, right? But in practical terms, that's kind of not how it oftentimes works. Oftentimes what you're doing is you're proving concept for this big company to just build it themselves. Right. So that's the challenge with a lot of the AI companies that I'm seeing out there right now, is that they're taking a piece of a solution. But the bigger solution is looking at it bigger, right? How do we take the process from beginning to end, right? Get to what the podcaster wants, but also start out in a way like you talked about the Descript platform.
Yeah.
But that Descript platform is pretty wide ranging in what it's capable of doing. I mean, you can edit audio with the text. You can create audio with the text. You can pull a transcript. They're increasingly getting into editing video. Plus, they also have the ability in the platform to do what's called overdub, which is basically creating a voice clone of any of us and be able to use that voice clone in the editing process to add audio via text.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's not just about deleting audio based on text. You can also potentially add audio based on text. And that's a whole nother level. Right.
Yeah, it's a really exciting area. Rob, I'm going to have to get you back on because I need to do my last questions, but there's still like half a dozen questions that I didn't get around to asking you. Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I ask the same 6 questions to all my guests. They're quickfire questions. They don't need a quickfire answer. They're a little bit thought-provoking. First question is, what's the best decision that you've made?
I think the best decision that I made was getting involved in creating media. That definitely took my my career in a completely different way. I've owned restaurants. I've done lots of different things in my background. I used to work in the food business, and I think that probably the biggest decision that I made was walking into a radio station back in 1999, and that was a big risk. So, given what I've told you about my confidence and my ability to speak, that was a big gamble for me. And so what that proves to me is that you have to stretch yourself a little bit if you want to have an exciting life and to do things that are challenging.
Taking risks as well.
Right. And put yourself out there and take some chances, and often, I mean, it doesn't always work out, but in my case, it did.
Amazing. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Advice is I think, is to think about others first as much as possible. It's not always easy to do that, but to create win-win relationships, which is something which is a little bit of a dichotomy to my upbringing as a competitive athlete, which was crush, kill, destroy was kind of the ideology behind that. So I think that's the biggest piece of it. And teamwork is important too. You know, being an individual contributor, I believe is a little bit what I've gravitated towards over the last few years. But I also understand how to work in a team, but sometimes teams don't want to work together too. And I think that's also a big part.
Yeah. Who's helped you most in your career?
Trying to think here. Who's helped me most in my career? I would say um, other other content creators. I think to help me see things differently. Not always thinking that what I think is the right answer to everything. I think it's easy to fall into that trap of realizing that the experience that I have is the most important experience. But I think it's listening and learning from other experiences, and more specifically, it's been content creators.
Tell me about a regret that you have.
I regret not doing as many of my own hosted podcasts over probably the last 8-10 years. I've been a co-host on a show, but that's quite different than having my own show. So, and that's changing right now. I'm in the middle of changing that.
Yeah. Amazing. What are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of, my children, number one. I would say my work in the content creation industry. And I think I think those are the main ones.
Amazing. And what does legacy mean to you?
I don't know. I don't really think too much about that.
Okay.
It's more, I mean, I think it's part of what happens, but I don't know, once you're gone, you don't know what your legacy is at that point. But I guess, I think just working hard and making a difference in people's lives will create a legacy for you. No question.
I think often people get very grandiose about legacy, and it's, I want my business to run for 100 years off, but actually impacting people in your life. And they say that it takes 3 generations to be forgotten. So your friends, your family, then your kids, and then your grandkids. But after that, unfortunately, legacy probably doesn't stretch too far,
No, it doesn't.
unless you're an
like
Elon Musk and you're changing.
Or Michelangelo or Nikola Tesla or somebody like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And lastly, if people want to reach out to you, where can they get you, Rob?
Probably the best place, Twitter, all of the social networks are I'm active on. You can send me an email, rob.greenlee@gmail.com. I have a website, robgreenlee.com as well. But at Rob Greenlee on Twitter is a great place. You can send me a direct message or whatever, but I'm also on LinkedIn too. So you can find me over there.
Great stuff. Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much for your time. I would love to have you back in a couple of months' time, and we can sort of fill in some of these other gaps. Your inductee on the Podcast Hall of Fame. We could talk about the role of video. There is still so much for us to talk. So hopefully in a few months' time, you would like to come back again.
Yeah. Send an invite. I'd be happy to join you anytime.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Rob. It's absolute pleasure speaking to you. You're an inspiration to me in the podcasting world, and I just think you're a great guy. And thank you so much for joining me today.
All right, Mark. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I really hope you've enjoyed that content. It's a really fascinating interview that I've done there. So please do, if you are enjoying this content, please do give it a like. Please do give a subscribe. It'd be really good to boost the subscriptions. It really makes a difference to the algorithm in YouTube. So thank you for that. If you do hit subscribe, hit the bell icon, and you'll get all of the content. You'll get notified when all the content is available. Thank you so much for your time. It's really appreciated. Thanks a lot.